Hi, this is Lee from the Law School Toolbox. Today we have Steve Schwartz of LSAT Unplugged joining us to talk about the LSAT. Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we're excited to have a returning guest, Steve Schwartz from LSAT Unplugged, to talk to us about all that's happened with the LSAT, all that's happening with the LSAT, how we're supposed to prepare for the LSAT. So we're thrilled to have you here. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks so much for having me back on, Lee. It's a pleasure.
All right. So the LSAT's been changing. I'll confess I don't track the LSAT that carefully anymore since I don't do admissions work for law students, but a lot has changed. I mean, there are no logic games.
Mm-hmm.
What? That's like the cornerstone of what the LSAT was for most of us.
I know. It's been a crazy couple of years of changes. The logic games was kind of an unexpected removal. I'm sad about it myself. They're the most interesting and fun part of it, I thought, but it is what it is. And we're all kind of muddling along and adjusting. And the silver lining for a lot of students going forward is that there's less material to study. They just cut off a third of the exam. And so now you can double down and focus more on the remaining sections and get a bigger score boost. So there is a plus to it.
So let's say someone is very ignorant, like me, about some of these changes, and maybe they are thinking of studying for the LSAT. So can you just give us like a quick Cliff Notes version of what the LSAT looks like right now?
Yeah, for sure. So the LSAT now only has two types of sections. You have logical reasoning and reading comprehension. Logical reasoning is a section of short, bite-sized arguments. You have 25 of them or so to complete in 35 minutes. And they will give you the argument and ask you to strengthen it or weaken it or identify the flaw or the conclusion. And then in reading comprehension, you get 3 long passages and then 2 short passages on a related topic. And for each passage, you're asked a series of questions like what's the main idea, what's the primary purpose, the author's opinion, as well as some detail-oriented questions as well. And so you're analyzing arguments in logical reasoning, and you're analyzing longer reading comp passages in that section. There are 2 sections of logical reasoning and 1 section of reading comp that are all scored.
So I feel like this is a very different test, which will probably reward certain skills for some students. I felt like the logical reasoning was a lot easier for folks who maybe did STEM or really were visual. I know that that's one of the reasons they removed it, right? Because there were complaints that it was impossible for some folks, especially, I think, wasn't it blind students who said that it was not, that there was no way that they could take the test with accommodations.
That's right. So the logic games, yeah.
Yeah. So, do you think this is a benefit for certain students with certain skill sets?
Yeah. So I do think that logic games definitely probably appealed more to students with more of a STEM mathematical background. I think it appealed more to those who are stronger in, say, spatial reasoning. So, and I definitely think that, yeah, you needed to be able to diagram to solve that reasonably. I can't see how someone could have done it without being able to see diagrams. And so I understand the contentions of the plaintiffs who sued LSAC in that case. They were blind test takers who contended they were at an unfair disadvantage. And so LSAC could have made accommodations just for them. They chose not to. They were kind of stubborn and bureaucratic. And then here we are. The exam changed for everyone as a result of that settlement. And so some groups were hurt by the presence of logic games. Some were helped by it. And so LSAC says, overall, it's a wash. But overall, of course, on the individual level, some were helped and some were hurt. And so now I think it's appealing more to those who are stronger in reading and analyzing dense text.
Yeah. I feel like students for whom English is not their first language, that makes that a much more challenging test because, I mean, with dense text, assume there's still quite a bit of time pressure. I know for the bar exam, that's one thing that's either foreign trained attorneys or just students for whom English is not their first language. It's very challenging to do things under that time pressure that requires that much reading.
Yeah, 100% agreed. So that's a group that's definitely disadvantaged by the change because you have more analyzing text, more difficult vocabulary to parse, whereas logic games, it was more mathematical and symbolic. And so you're manipulating, variables or A, B, C, D, E, which are kind of arbitrary in nature. And so it's more about kind of diagramming them and manipulating them, which language was not nearly as big a factor.
So with the students that you work with to help people study for the LSAT, what feedback have you gotten about the preparation process? Do students find that it's very different, especially if they took the old version and the new version, although you don't hopefully have to take the LSAT too many times? But what feedback have you been hearing from your student population?
Well, retaking has definitely become a lot more common because students are more aware that law schools don't average multiple scores, and the LSAT's offered 8 times a year now. It used to be only offered 4 times a year pre-pandemic. And so there are a number of students who studied for it in the old format with games and the new format without games. And so they will say, my score in the old version was X, my score in the new version is Y. And that could be higher, it could be lower, different for every student. And the big change going forward is double down on logical reasoning, since it is now 2/3 of the exam. And so LSAC, when they removed logic games, they replaced it with a second scored logical reasoning section. And so the benefit there is if you spend more time on logical reasoning and you improve there, any gains you make are doubled because there are 2 sections of it. So more bang for your buck. And so one of the big changes we made for our students in terms of redoing study plans for anyone taking the LSAT after the change is we're going to devote roughly 2/3 of your time to logical reasoning, all else being equal. That's the biggest overall strategic change. Then a stranger change on a more individual level is that when LSAC removed logic games, they started evolving the logical reasoning section to include a bit more formal logic, a bit more symbolic logic. And so it's as if they are taking some of those skills that were tested in logic games and integrating them more subtly into logical reasoning. And they're not advertising that as a formal change. If you ask them, they would say nothing has changed, but we are seeing those indications.
All right. Does that mean logic reasoning, like that you would take a class in college on logic? Like, could you give an example? Like, what do you think that means?
Well, there are students who will ask me, should I take a class in logic in college? And if you really want to do it, if you think you would do well, by all means, go do it from the perspective that college is a place to learn and explore and try out new subjects. However, if it's going to hurt your GPA, that could hurt your law school admissions chances. And a lot of what you learn in a formal logic class in college goes way beyond what you need for the LSAT. And a lot of what is formal and symbolic, like P, caret Q, or however they tend to diagram things in formal logic textbooks, is impractical in a strictly timed exam like the LSAT. And so I would say the best way to get better at the LSAT is to do LSAT. And if you want to do some light informal logic analysis prior, that's fine, just for fun. But I think the best way to study the LSAT is to do the thousands of LSAT questions released.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another question. Is there any issue with prep with these changes, or is there still plenty to practice with?
There still is plenty to practice with, because the evolution of the logical reasoning section does not mean that LSAC is including some radical new type of question, thankfully. So we have a whole backlog of old exams to look at and analyze, but what this means is that the relative proportions of those questions have changed. And so if there might have been only a couple of really formal logic-heavy questions in logical reasoning, now maybe there are double that number of questions. But we can always take any new question and trace it back to a similar older question from a released exam. And so if you were to study 10 exams worth of material and know them inside out, you'd be in a great position to knock out whatever LSAC throws your way.
Okay. Well, that's great, because I know that's one of the challenges to future cast for folks who might be listening to this.
Yeah.
There are changes for the bar exam, and one of the issues is we don't really have that much of an example of what the new test looks like.
That's a new frontier,
big
unknowns,
problem.
yeah.
It's a new frontier. It's going to make prep pretty challenging for a bit. And there's now a writing sample part, right, to the LSAT too?
Yeah, so the writing sample has undergone a couple of changes as well. It used to be pre-pandemic, the LSAT was only in person. You would do 5 sections, 4 of them were scored, 1 was unscored. And then you had the writing sample in that same sitting afterwards. So you were doing 6 35-minute sections in one day in person at a testing center. And that's working out to over 3 hours. So that's pretty grueling. We talk a lot in other contexts about like endurance and focus and attention, right? Like, so That was pretty rough. Now you're doing the 3 scored sections, 2 logical reasonings, 1 reading comp, 1 unscored extra section of either reasoning or reading comp in that sitting on test day. And then in a separate sitting on a different day, you do the writing sample. So you could do the writing sample when you're fresh without the stress of doing the real scored portions on that same day, which is nice. It used to be only 35 minutes. You sit down and write an essay. Now they give you 15 minutes to prep on scratch paper and then do your 35 minutes of written essay. And so a bit more pre-work and planning to produce a better result. But in my view, it doesn't matter a whole lot because it's not scored. So for most applicants, not a big deal. The exceptions are, the caveat here is if you are a non-native English speaker where you're concerned that admissions might have questions around your native English fluency, or your English grades were just terrible in college, or your writing grades were just terrible, this is a chance to show admissions that you do have strong writing ability and you do have what it takes to succeed in law, which is, of course, writing's a big part of that.
Right.
But this is all unscored, and so I'd say focus more on the scored portions of the LSAT to consider this just a place to put your best foot forward. But LSAT has given some indications that they will score this in the future.
Fascinating. So what are you writing on?
So you're writing an argumentative essay. In the past, they would give you a dilemma where you have 2 options and both of them are equally weighted. And so one of them might be, for example, should you go to a T14 law school with 0 scholarships, or should you go to a lower ranked school with more scholarships? And there are strong arguments to make on both sides of this. It's a trade-off, right? Nothing is black and white. That was the old format essay. Now, the argumentative writing, which they instituted starting August of 2024, they now give you some primary source material where I think about, like, in the AP exams, they have like document-based questions. If anyone's familiar, like you look at some raw material source where you can use as evidence and you pull that evidence into your essay. And so you're analyzing exhibit A, exhibit B, and then you're using exhibit A and exhibit B to make your case in favor of your argument, the side that you're choosing.
So no wonder you have to plan it, because
Yeah.
you couldn't, that's not writing on the fly. That's something that you have to prep for. Well, that you have to prepare before you write, or
ideally. Yeah. Previously
Yeah.
you were doing your note taking, you were doing your prep planning as part of the 35 minutes. So it was eating into your time. And so maybe you would spend 5-10 minutes planning and have only 25, 30 minutes to write. Now you've got 35 minutes just to write.
Well, interesting. So you and I offline and online have talked some about AI, because who's not talking about AI? I think it's interesting that they're inkling that they want to see what students can do as part of the LSAT with writing, assuming they cannot engage ChatGPT or Claude or one of our other, whoever, I don't know who our AI friends will be, in a year or 2 from now. That's right. But I'm wondering if that could be one of the reasons why they may want to make this change to force students to show their writing ability in an exam context.
Yeah, could be. I think that's definitely a valid point. Law schools seem not to really know what to do about AI and the problems it poses for, say, law school application essays. It used to be that you had the scored LSAT, you had undergraduate GPA with grade inflation, of course, making it questionable. The LSAT was the one objective measure. Now, then you had the essays, which for the most part, I think actually are pretty authentic measures of a applicant's writing ability, at least until a couple of years ago when AI came onto the scene. Because some folks might have had admissions consultants help them with their essays, but that was reserved for an elite few who could afford that. Now, ChatGPT and similar have kind of democratized access to pretty high quality, if bland and generic, editing. And so now the law schools are like, well, we don't have that to rely on anymore as much. So the writing sample becomes relatively more important since it's unfiltered. And so they are maybe wanting it to be scored to give them a more objective way to look at this at scale, rather than actually reading everybody's essays, well, God forbid, when they have thousands of applications.
They don't want to do that.
But yeah, it's interesting. Like University of Michigan, for example, a couple of years ago, they explicitly banned the use of AI in essays, for application essays. And how could they really know if you used it or not? Kind of on the honor system, I suppose. which matters because you go before the bar, you got to be truthful, but they wouldn't really know. They since flipped their position, and now they have an essay where they require you to use AI to write your essay. So props for creativity, I suppose. But it's like that 180 on it just suggests they're kind of flailing around in my perspective. And they're like, we don't really know what to do with this, but we know we got to say something.
Yeah. It makes me think of the dark ages when I was in 5th grade. And I had this teacher, Mrs. Pearson, who is very old school. And in the classroom, a bunch of kids were telling her that it was silly for us to have to memorize our multiplication tables because we all had calculators. And she would make us go to the board and do the multiplication tables, racing them on the board, who could do them the fastest. And she did one test and where she handed it out and she said, here are your options. 1, you can take the test without a calculator and I will just score it. Or you can take it with a calculator. And if you make a mistake, you will fail.
Ooh, risky.
She said, because if you have a calculator, you should not make a mistake. And it's weird how I can't even remember what I did. Knowing myself, I did it without the calculator because failure was not an option. I was not one of the people who was like, I'm going to take that gamble. But it is kind of interesting to me because that, which was many years ago at this point, it kind of rings true to me to some of the stuff that we're seeing with AI. Like, if you're going to use these tools, it better be perfect. It better not have any mistakes in it. It better be factually accurate, because you can't have typos if you can use the computer to make sure that you don't have typos.
Mm-hmm.
There can't be a typo. And I don't know that folks are really ready for that, are ready for that expectation that if you're going to use these tools, then the work has to be perfect. So that's fascinating that Michigan's doing that. But on the other hand, you wonder what standard they're using. If there's a different perfection standard for someone who is, or for an essay where they're using AI. I know my personal patience for typos that I see on job applications and things like that has dropped because I'm like, you shouldn't have any typos in your job applications. Like, sorry.
Fair point. Yeah, but fair point. Yeah, you shouldn't have any typos. But then on the other hand, like the applicants also need to spot check and prove everything for hallucinations, right? Like if it could totally make up some credential that it thinks you have when you don't. And so if your essay is claiming a credential that you don't actually have, and you're like, well, I didn't lie, the AI made that up. Well, like you're still responsible for what you submit, as well as the overuse of M-dashes.
Oh, so true.
Yeah.
And emojis. No emojis in job applications or law school applications. Just leave it out. ChatGPT, we don't like your emojis.
No.
I do not like them. I don't like to see them in newsletters that people produce. I just don't like them.
Yeah, they're cringe. They're trying too hard.
So it's like, I'm so approachable. I have all these emojis. Like, no, I think not. Emojis are for text messages. That is the appropriate place for an emoji. Maybe that's very, Gen X. See, I think I'm the end of Gen X / millennial. That's where I am. Okay. So I think that's fascinating. And I think it's also fascinating that the schools, per usual, don't know what to do with the next thing. And they're flailing around about how they're going to pick these applicants. Is the LSAC generally been pretty nimble with their changes? Do you think that with AI and with kind of the changing landscape that changes may come fast and furious, or are they pretty deliberate and like this will be what the test looks like for a while?
So LSAC, I wouldn't say they're nimble or quick in general. They're pretty slow to change, pretty bureaucratic, but it took them till 2019 to move the LSAT from being literally on paper to being digital. And what they did was in July 2019, they had it on a tablet for the first time, which was slow relative to the MCAT and the GMAT and the GRE. I think they were the last of that group of grad level exams to get digital. But when the pandemic came around, I got to give them props. The pandemic, hit the US in roughly March 2020. And within 2 months, they had the temporary LSAT Flex format, meaning they were doing it online. And so in 2 months, roughly 60 days, they managed to go from in person on a tablet to bring it online so that people could still continue taking the LSAT and getting their law school plans in order. So that was pretty awesome of them. I got to give them props for that. In terms of changes going forward, I don't think anything is going to be fast. unless there's some similarly crazy out of left field event. Hopefully not, fingers crossed.
Hopefully not.
Yeah. But I mean, the only thing that is on the horizon I see going ahead would be the scoring of the writing sample. They said that they're looking at scoring it in the future, but they always make their changes. They always announce their changes far in advance. And so their cycles run from July to June of the following year. And so what that means is that they're not going to make any changes to the exam until July of 2026 at the earliest. And they would probably announce that by January or February of 2026. But that's the next change I would expect. And I'm not sure how they're going to score the writing sample. I know that with the SAT writing, which is scored, they would have reviewers evaluating the essays super fast. And there are questions as to how valid their scoring was. For example, if you use more big vocabulary words, you get a higher score. If your essay is longer, you get a higher score. And so if you threw in lots of big vocab words and just kind of word vomited a whole bunch of stuff, you might get a better score, which isn't right, because I think that concision's an important skill as well. That isn't necessarily covered in that scoring rubric.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know for the bar exam, I think the average time someone spends on your essay is 2 to 3 minutes. Which, I mean, given the volume of essays, that makes sense. But when you really sit down and I always tell people to sit down and try and read your written answer in 2 minutes and see how much you can read of it. It's very sobering to see that your legal career is based on that. But I've been a law professor. I've read stacks of exams, and you can see how fast your professors have to go through them too. Because if they have a huge stack, they want to go on holiday. Like, they can't spend 15 minutes a question. They'll be there forever. It's just, it is what it is.
Of course. But I think there's also like some validity to the general heuristics around grading, where if someone does have more complex sentence structures, if they are varied, if they have more to say, if they're able to use bigger vocabulary words correctly, that probably is in general a decent proxy. What I'm curious about is what's going to happen when you have writing samples that are required to be human written, but then they grade them with AI. I could see them trying to grade with AI to do this at scale. And how fair is that? What would be the perception, at least?
And I don't think AI is that great at grading yet. Not based on what I have evaluated. Well, now that we have been talking a little bit about technology, let's talk about why I'll change the question. Should people just use AI to prep them for the LSAT?
Oh my God. I see people asking that and posting about it every single day. I see students mentioning that to me, and it concerns me greatly. The LSAT is a test of nuance, and AI isn't always great at nuance. It could get things right maybe the majority of the time. I think the last time I saw ChatGPT graded on its performance on the LSAT, it scored somewhere around a 165, which is not a bad score, but a lot of students want to do better than 165. And when you're trusting AI to answer your LSAT question for you, and it's confidently answering every single time, whether it's right or wrong, and you don't know whether it's right or wrong, that poses a major problem. And so maybe it's getting a lot of the easier questions right, but on the harder ones, it can't pick up on the subtle gradations between, say, a necessary assumption and a sufficient assumption, which are the same issues that students face. But if it's not giving you accurate information and you don't know, and this is who you're learning from, that's a real issue.
Yeah. I think that sometimes you really have to think about how these tools or these learning models have been trained, and like what's really their purpose or what they're designed for. And I'm not sure that prepping the LSAT right now is what they're designed for.
No, I mean, they're trained on what the entire internet, the entire corpus of digitized human knowledge, and the LSAT is a very small subset of that and a very unique subset of that as well. And so I could imagine that 10 years from now, 5 years from now, someone's going to build an LSAT-specific AI that might actually be really good. But until that happens, and even then, I'd still take it with a grain of salt, because the LSAT questions are so rigorously analyzed, and they do all sorts of detailed data analysis to verify their validity. And the people who write them have philosophy PhDs, and they're debating these endlessly. And so,
and they're testing them.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't understand that, why you get that sample question is the same thing for the SAT, right? It's because these questions go through a rigorous process to make sure that they reflect what they're trying to reflect. And, if you ask ChatGPT or whoever to like write you an LSAT question, it's not going to be the same. It's not the same offering. And I test these tools on doing legal analysis and things like that. And it's not always good, folks. Right now, that's not really what they're designed to do.
No, certainly not. I mean, you could take some of the hardest LSAT questions, plug them in, and you'll see that it sometimes gets them wrong. And so if it's getting those wrong, then why are you trusting it with anything else? There's this phenomenon where you read an article in the mainstream media about a topic that you're an expert in, and you see them getting things wrong, and you're like, well, this particular thing is questionable, but I'm going to trust everything else that they say. Like, you need to take things with a grain of salt and do your own analysis and double check and cross check between multiple sources.
Yeah, I know. I just had a really annoying AI going off the deep end, and making stuff up experience. It drives me crazy. Yeah. I mean, I caught it, but it really makes me angry because I feel like I wasted my time by trying to be more efficient. You know what I mean? Like, I could have just done it myself and it would have been right the first time I did it. Are there any ways that students can use these AI tools, though, to help them? So, for instance, I have talked to folks who use it to help suggest a study schedule or a daily rhythm, or to say, like, I have so many months to study and I work 40 hours a week. How much should I study? Is there any way that AI could be an accountability partner for students or help with that separate from the teaching them how to take the test?
Yeah, I think it could serve as a useful brainstorming partner or to help you see blind spots in how you're going about things. I wouldn't use it to go over actual LSAT logic necessarily, but let's say you have a busy schedule, you have a variety of obligations, work, family, school, and you're seeing, where can I carve out LSAT study time productively? Where could I fit in? If I have 30 minutes, what could I be doing? If I have an hour, what could I be doing? These are my weak areas. Should I be drilling questions or doing timed exams? And I think ideally you're talking with a human being who has experience in these areas to help you. And that could be an LSAT coach or tutor, but it could also be a study buddy or a friend who's in law school, just to at least give you an alternate perspective. But aside from those, I think that brainstorming strategies around how to study or what to study could definitely be useful. I think that a lot of students struggle with accountability and motivation. And so if you're just plugging in, I know that ChatGPT at least has a memory of you based on what you've put in there. And so if you can have it remind you of your why and your motivation, that might be helpful.
Yeah, I know that some folks use it to help with prioritization too, saying like, I have all these things I have to do today. Help me prioritize my time or balance my time. And I could see someone who's struggling carving out the time to study, because LSAT prep, no offense, not so fun. Yeah. I mean, if I had to list the things that I do for fun over the summer, it's probably not one of them. But and I used to be an SAT tutor. I mean, I'm somebody who voluntarily does test prep for a living, but I can see someone, who needs that, that I'm overwhelmed or I have these 25 things to do and I'm supposed to prep for the LSAT for 2 hours today. How do I prioritize? I think that AI can help with that. It can be that sounding board. And a lot of people don't have someone, a human, that they can, help with that. Of course, again, you have to evaluate it, make sure that you feel good about it. But if your schedule feels like chaos, maybe it can give you a suggestion of not chaos. And then you can go, through to that. I guess it could help you balance, studying what comes up more often than others. But it seems like for this one right now, you still need an expert in your corner to explain what this test is and how to excel at it.
Yeah, I would say so. And I mean, I'm not going to say that you could never use it to help you think through the logic of a question, but you can't blindly trust what it tells you.
And we don't know what logic it was trained on.
Right.
Right? I mean, I think that sometimes you're like, I don't know who taught you logic, ChatGPT. We don't know we don't know, right? I mean, they use the internet to teach it, but the internet's got all sorts of stuff in it. So you can be 100% sure, what version of logic it's even using.
No, one thing I hear is that it hallucinates because it's very eager to please, kind of like a kid. Like it always wants to have the right answer, always wants to jump and be the first one with their hand raised to impress you with what they know. But that they do that whether they know it or not, whether they know the answer or not. And so
yes,
it's kind of saying stuff and you're treating it like it's the oracle when it's not. And who knows where it's going to get to, but for now, at least I've put in some of the hardest LSAT questions and seen it get them wrong every single time, answering the same way that students answer confidently and incorrectly. And so it can get easy things right. It can do drills pretty well, but it's going to get a certain percentage of hard questions wrong, and you're not going to know which one it is.
Oh, yes. This was back before the summer. I was doing this project where I was sure that AI could help me build this spreadsheet that was going to run this automatic balancing to something. I had this whole plan. I don't code spreadsheets. There was a time in my life where I did stuff like that. That time has passed. And so my knowledge is very dated in that. But I'm like, I bet AI is going to be able to tell me how to do this because I've heard it codes, right? So I tell it my problem and it's like, oh, yes, we can do that. And it gives me code. And then I was like, great, now walk me through the whole process. And I get on Excel and then it didn't work in Excel. So I did it on Google Sheets and it was completely lying to me. It had no idea what it was doing. Then I was having it debug and then it would be like, oh, you're right, there's an issue. And then it would give me more code and that code was broken. And I did this for 2 hours. I don't know why I gave this problem 2 hours of my life, but I assumed that it was me. I tried 2 different chat engines to see what was going on. And in the end, nothing worked, but it would never admit that it didn't know how to do it. Every single time it would come back and say no, I have another idea. Or you're right, that wasn't the right code. Let me give you some new code, oh, you're right, that was wrong. Or I always love when I'll catch it lying to me and they'll be like, oh, you're so right, that was a mistake. I'm like, why are you making mistakes? You should not be making mistakes. You're not a person, right? But these experiences that I think are very important because it does make me more skeptical of what it does. And when you're testing it in a way, it couldn't build me the tool it promised me it could build. So it was clear to me that it wasn't working. It has made me more skeptical. I think that if you put in LSAT questions and it's just spitting you back great, lies or falsehoods that it sounds very confident about, you can't show that that's broken, right? I could show that the code was broken. And so that was easy, but I think it can be really hard to tell when it's hallucinating and when it's not.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, they're very pliable and very eager to please. If you tell it the right answer, it can explain it backwards. But if I lied to it and told it that the wrong answer was correct, it would give me a whole elaborate explanation for why the wrong answer is correct. And one thing I like to do sometimes is I'll open up 2 separate threads and ask the same questions, and it'll give me 2 totally different answers just because it takes a meandering, random, wandering path to get to its answer through different lines of reasoning, but it could end up at 2 different results, and both of them could be wrong, especially when you're dealing with numbers. And some LSAT questions do involve numbers as well.
Oh, yes. I just had it totally screw up something with numbers this week, too. And then I said, didn't you screw that up? And it was like, oh, you're right. That's my favorite one. It's like, you're correct. I did screw that up. And again, it goes back to my 5th grade teacher. You use the calculator. Make mistakes. Sometimes I'm like, aren't you the big calculator? I don't understand.
I think the calculators are more reliable, right?
I think so. Well, the calculator typically doesn't make up things.
No.
Yeah, well, I think it's an interesting, topic and thing for folks to think about, which is, how can you use these tools to maybe support you, but don't get derailed. I'm sure that you, like I do, see some Reddit posts where folks have all sorts of creative solutions for how to prep for things. But a lot of that stuff is just a distraction. And I think even going down an AI rabbit hole to help you prep for LSAT could also be a distraction. So what are some of your tips for, not getting caught up in the noise and just trying to be focused and goal-oriented and just get ready for the test. Like that's the goal.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that there's no reason to actually use AI in particular for LSAT prep, just because over the past 10, 15 years with the web becoming big, there's so many high quality LSAT prep resources out there that folks can use, mine among them, but not exclusively mine. There's plenty of other great stuff out there too. There's great textbooks, there's great video courses. Zoom is a thing for live classes, for one-on-one coaching, for LSAT prep specifically. And then I think that, there's also thousands and thousands of real LSAT questions that were available only in book form. LSAC put them all online into their Law Hub platform. And so you can easily access literally thousands and thousands of previously administered LSAT questions. And you get, I think, 4 exams available for free. And then if you purchase their subscription, which is $120 a year, well worth it, you're getting access to all the others. And so no reason to ask AI to make up an LSAT question for you that it could itself be flawed. Just use the real official LSAT prep materials from Law Hub. They're not paying me to promote it, although I wish they were, but it's a great resource there. If you are going to use AI for anything law school admissions, I do think it could be helpful for brainstorming application essay topics and ideas, maybe giving feedback on a rough draft. Of course, you've got to check the rules. Some schools allow AI, some do not allow AI. Michigan requires it for one of their essays, but it could help you at least editing so that you're not including typos or misusing vocabulary words. I think that's probably more of a useful area for AI specifically, but when it comes to LSAT, there's enough human-created resources out there that you don't need to go beyond that.
Yes. Please, perfect resumes with no typos. Like, that's what it's great for.
Mm-hmm.
It's really good at that. That I just use it for what it's good for.
Yeah.
But please, if you one day want to work for me, don't send me a resume with typos on it anymore.
Yeah.
It's just, no, please don't.
Zero tolerance.
And don't submit law school application essays with typos in it either. I mean, check the rules, but make sure that stuff is error-free. I think our tolerance of errors is going to go down with all of this AI support.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've talked a little bit about what you do, but if folks want to learn more about what you do and how you support people getting ready to make this leap into the LSAT prep land, tell me more about your work.
Yeah, for sure. So at LSAT Unplugged, we offer comprehensive LSAT prep services, including private, personalized one-on-one coaching programs. We have a semi-private program as well, all via Zoom, remote access from anywhere. We also have a comprehensive on-demand video courses. We create personalized day-by-day study plans for our students. If folks want to find out more about me and what I do, I've got a lot of free stuff out there as well. I have the LSAT Unplugged podcast, LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel. I'm on all the socials, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook, and so folks can feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to help.
Awesome. Well, this has been super interesting. I learned a lot since my knowledge base was not so high on all of these changes. So thank you for educating me in what's been happening. And we'll come back for the next round of changes. Who knows? Things change fast these days. Maybe ChatGPT is going to start grading things. I don't know. We'll see. We'll come back and talk about the next round of changes.
Definitely looking forward to it. It was a pleasure. Thanks.
All right. Thanks so much.
If you enjoyed this video, please take a second to give us a like and leave a comment, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any future content. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us via the contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com.